Good afternoon or morning, whenever you're watching this. Chapter 6 is about sexuality. We will be talking about both the act of sexuality, but don't worry, very few details here, as well as sexual orientation. And so without further ado, my goal is to be under 35 minutes, so let's get started. So here are our learning objectives. We want to define sexual orientation. We're going to talk about sociology's take on this, the biology of human sexuality, sexual behavior, teen sex, sexuality and health, and then also pornography here at the end. So let us talk about sexuality. Sexuality is about how people identify. It's a self-orientation removed from the behavior. The behavior may follow. That's part of sexuality. But we think about more about an identity, like I am this, right? Which may be wrapped up in behavior, it may not be, right? Or it may be just like who the desire for certain people. So. Sexuality is an expression of free choice. This has become more important as we've lost our groups. Like we're living really independently today compared to the past, and so this idea of like this is who I am as a person, and sexuality is a part of that. And we expect everyone to have a sexual identity. It's not necessarily about like we expect everyone to have sex. That's kind of the expectation, but it's more about, like looking at the 15-year-old. Most people aren't going to look at the 15-year-old and say you should be having sex. What they're looking at the 15-year-old and they're thinking you should have an identity. You should be thinking about that in terms of like with whom and who are you desiring and things like that. Which I don't know. It's like we never looked at our 15-year-olds before and thought that, and so it's sort of a new expectation. So sometimes I wonder if we're doing ourselves any favors by doing this. So the openness of like, hey, you get to decide who you want to be attracted to and when you want to have sex and with whom. That openness has created feelings of uncertainty. Like some people are sort of paralyzed in the in the questions. Like I don't know. Like it's a lot to think about and to process, and so it's a lot of uncertainty and some anxiety around that. So let's talk about sexual orientation. Sexual orientation become increasingly important as there's more choices than there has been in the past. In the past, it was just assumed that people were heterosexual. Even the term heterosexual was not even applied until the 1800s, because even if people were having sex with people of the same sex, they were having gay sex, it's still, there wasn't like a label for that. It's just like, oh, that person is having sex with that person. It wasn't like these boxes that we would have put people in today for those. So sexual orientation is a pattern of romantic and sexual attraction to other people in relation to their own gender. What else? It exists on a continuum. People think about it like this. You could sort of, people can say like absolutely one thing or absolutely something else. These kind of the two, if this over here is to be gay and this over here is to be heterosexual, the thought is that most people are probably somewhere here in this category right there. That was that researcher that's slipping my mind at the moment, but out in California did that research, I don't know, 100 years ago or so. What else? People often embrace the identity of either heterosexual or homosexual. Again, the labels themselves are fairly new, so we sort of box ourselves in. There's a lot, like a heavy penalty to pay for being homosexual, and so most people are just going to identify with heterosexual, even if maybe they have desires or experiences outside of that. You could think about a prison system where people are in prison with people of the same sex, and maybe they're sexually active with them or not, but they're probably still going to be identifying as heterosexual, even if they're having sex with someone else of the same sex. So. Here we have several sexual orientation categories. And so we'll start at the top here with bisexuality. You can think of bisexuality as two, right? Like a bicycle, right? Attracted to both men and women, rather. Realize that because they are gay, many straights don't include them. They're excluded from straight circles. But because they're not gay, because they're attracted to the other sex, they're oftentimes excluded from gay groups or gay, circles as well. So pansexuality, if you think about pan as like a pandemic, it's a cross, right? So attractions are not limited to men or women or transgenders, and so it's like it's across all categories. They're not choosing based upon like one category or another. They're choosing based upon other things, right? Asexuality, you can think of A as non, so you could think about people who are asexual, have little or no sexual desire. That doesn't mean they're not sexually active or not even in relationships either, because there are benefits that come with sex, like you get to have children and you get to be part of relationships and things like that. So within all these categories, it may be that people would, all things being equal, not have sex or have sex with both genders, but they may not follow their desires because the rewards are better if they don't. Right? Same gender attraction and behavior is more common among women. I may have some stats for you here. Okay. Regarding more of the minority sexual statuses, queer is a catch-all term for people who are not heterosexual. So that word used to be, a bad word that you didn't want to use, but it's become, become more used by people who are in that category, and so it just refers to people who are not heterosexual. Sexual orientation is not the same as behavior. People can be behaving in one manner, but not categorize themselves in that manner. So I mentioned earlier about prison. If men are in prison having sex with other men, they may not consider themselves homosexual, because they may say, well, yeah, but if I had a choice, I would not be sleeping with the same sex. So it's about self-categorized. In the same way, people who maybe has partners died a long time ago and they haven't been sexually active for a long time, they also, may consider themselves to still be heterosexual or homosexual. Exclusively homosexual behavior and identity occur in less than 5% of American adults. So 5% is just a rough number when you talk about the number of gay people in the United States. 5. Some people will say it's a lot more, some people will say it's less, but again, it's difficult to kind of categorize, because if it's just about self-categorization, then it's like, well, people who are not sexually active can identify themselves as being gay, or who are sexually active with people of the same sex won't categorize themselves as that category. So you can understand it can be difficult to get an accurate number on that. Scientific attitudes toward homosexuality. So it's changed a bit. In the 1900s, it was considered a mental illness. Scientists now understand that it's naturally occurring, not just in humans, but in other things as well. Denial of one's sexual orientation can be a potential mental health problem, in the sense that people who are having to, especially keeping their life in the closet, keeping everything secret, pretending to be one way, while they're trying to figure it out on their own, that can be very difficult and very distressing. Religions have, at least not all religions, but you think about like Islam and Judaism and Christianity, have historically condemned homosexuality. It's more accepting today than it was in the past, to varying degrees. There is rehabilitation, usually within the churches, that try to rehabilitate people. I'm using the word gay rehab. It's really not an accurate term. I'm trying to think of what it's called. it's like there are organizations like Exodus International, right, where you're people who want to change. They no longer want to be gay, and they're going to try to make themselves not gay by doing various exercises and prayers and things like that. They tend not to be effective. They tend not to be effective, and even the founders of some of these organizations have actually like come out and said, I tried for years to not be gay, and I'm giving up the fight, and I'm going to be gay. It can be harmful. It also can be like a place of gathering of people like, oh, I'm a gay Christian, and I don't know that many other gay Christians, and so an opportunity for people to come together who have shared life issues, and sometimes that can be therapeutic. But in terms of like acceptable versus not acceptable, many countries, Western countries anyway, are saying we don't want these things. They're not helpful. They don't work, and they can be very harmful for people. Because what if you go to this rehabilitation center for 6 months, right? And you're doing all the things, and then 6 months later you're not cured, right? Then it can be really detrimental for people's mental health. We have a big change in the number of people who are saying that homosexuality is acceptable, right? So we have a big change. We have here gay and lesbian relationships. In 2001, we had 40% saying it was acceptable. In 2022, we have over 70% saying it's acceptable. You have other changes in abortion. You have changes in sex between unmarried men and women, going from about half in 2000 to about 75% in 2022. Divorce, you have to go from 60% think it's moral to about 80% that think it's moral. A little bit of change in the married men and women having an affair. I think people are looking at that and saying, hey, this is causing lots of damage. Not everyone involved here is consenting. You know, the other spouse may not know, and therefore that's going to cause some problems, breakdowns, and things like that. Here we go. Having a baby outside of marriage, you know, it's about 45% consider it moral in 2001 to about 70%. So overall, sexual behavior has become much more morally accepted. The things that our grandparents and great-grandparents would have considered, you know, terrible and not morally acceptable has become much more acceptable in more recent times. Oh, there's the blow up, but too late. All right, let's talk about sexual behavior. So we're talking here about changes in sexual behavior and how they've changed across time. So technology has changed sexual behavior, specifically in the form of birth control pills, which have changed the narrative, or at least the way that women and men are thinking about sex. Before like effective birth control, it would have been the thought of, hey, if we have sex, we might create a child, and that is an 18-year commitment. And so it's really impacts women, especially. And so it's like, hey, do I want to be connected to this person for the next 18 years? Because if I don't want to be connected to them, I probably shouldn't have sex with them. The birth control pill changes that kind of narrative, and it becomes, hey, we're probably not going to create a baby with this, and so this could just be a one and done experience with this person. Kind of with that comes greater acceptance of sex outside of marriage. Young adults begin to think about sexual experiences as a way of like showing that they're an adult, showing that they're independent, showing that they're not a part of mom and dad. And there's an experimentation with like different people and maybe even different genders, trying on the identity of, hey, maybe I'm gay, or maybe I'm trying to, I don't know, be, you know, express my independence away from the old ways of maybe where I grew up, and I'm going to kind of show them, at least in my own head, that I'm not being controlled by them. Sex as an older age has become more commonplace. I think a couple of reasons for this. One is that we're healthier, and so it allows sex to be happening into people's 70s and 80s. And the other thing is that there's much more expectation that people and magazines and books and movies are encouraging everyone to be sexual and to have that be a really important part of their lives. There's also more privacy, and that allows people to be intimate later on into their life. Um, Viagra, things like that allow men and women to be sexual longer. Traditional moral authorities are concerned about the fact that society is placing perhaps more emphasis on pleasure than is healthy for society, because they're going to say, listen, it may be that it's pleasurable, but that doesn't mean it's good for people, good for children, good for society at large. And then the identities thing, that makes them really, really nervous. They say, hey, like it may be that your identity, you decide this, like, and you're kind of experimenting with identities, and you may land on an identity that is traditionally not accepted, like, pansexual, or homosexual, or something of that nature. All right, in regards to sex before marriage, there are some patterns that have been established regarding premarital sex, or sex that is occurring before marriage. And that is, in the United States, the expectation is that people are going to have sex before marriage. It was not always that way, meaning people were having sex before marriage, but the expectation wasn't there. We talked about people shacking up, or people living in sin, or things like that, to discourage people from doing this. That has largely gone away, although obviously there's pockets. It's going to be more common in rural areas to not think of that, more common in religious communities, like just more like Amish, or not Amish, anyway, more religious communities are going to discourage this. But there are some patterns, right? So one is that men are usually having more partners than women. Again, for men, they're not paying the penalty potentially for sexual behavior in a couple of ways. One, they're not going to be bearing the children, right? Carrying those in their bodies like women are. Also, they are less likely to contract sexually transmitted diseases than women are because of biological reasons. Having many partners is relatively uncommon. Especially among women. There is kind of these myths of the slut who is, having sex with everybody on the football team. Those are really good urban myths, and they make good gossip. They are few and far between, and they're mostly making mountains out of molehills. They're not often based in fact. So, and then when they do occur, usually it's because of trauma in the woman's life. Usually at a fairly young age, she was raped or molested by someone in her family, oftentimes repeatedly, and then people are promiscuous, usually as a reaction to that. So if you hear about that, if you know somebody like that, it's usually there's significant distress going on in their life. So. Sex without consent is relatively common. So this is unfortunate that we have a real problem with rape and molestation, sexual assault in this country, and even in places like college campuses. Not necessarily your community colleges, because you don't have people living there like you would the university, but this is really, I don't know, really unfortunate. I think it's like 1 out of every 4 women will be raped, or at least attempted raped, in their life. We have a sexual double standard. This is where we will reward men for doing something that we will punish women for doing. So if women sleep with 2 people in a week, we have names for her that are nasty. And if a guy sleeps with 2 women in a week, we've got names for him that are much more positive, right? And so we have just kind of a one-sided. We oftentimes think about sex, less today, but still it shows up in our language, where we think about sex as something that is done to women, right? So we punish women because we think of them as being passive when it comes to sex. You think about words that we would use to describe sex: hit, nail, screw. These are all carpentry terms. I don't know why we chose those, but things that are done to something, right? It's not making love. It's not this coming together of 2 people who are like both active participants. This is like a one like the board is not doing something when the nail is, going into it. It's passive, right? So we expect women to be passive in that. And if they're not passive, then we've going to label them, as something to encourage them to get back into their place of being passive. So, yeah, there we go. The sexual double standards, it applies stricter moral and legal codes to women's sexual behavior than it does to men's. And still you kind of see this when women in power are sexually promiscuous, they oftentimes receive a lot more punishment than a man who is promiscuous. So again, it's kind of this, we apply different standards to these two people. So we expect men to initiate sexual behavior, and we also think of men's sexual fulfillment as most important. Really, it wasn't until I think the sexual revolution in the 1960s when this idea that women should enjoy sex, or sex should be something that women should enjoy, kind of came to the forefront. I think before it was like, again, sex was something that was done to women, but it was for men's fulfillment. And then, today that's obviously changed. I think it's largely changed because we've been able to sell things to women. We're able to sell books and toys and things related to sex. And so because we're able to sell things, then we're telling women that you should enjoy sex. And, if you look like on the magazines, like cosmopolitan magazines, it's all about how to have a great sex life tonight, that sort of thing. Again, you're selling magazines, you're selling sex through a magazine. And so anyway, historically, parents policed their daughters' sexuality more so than they do today. Again, it kind of makes sense, especially if sex was going to equal a pregnancy, then it would make sense for the family to be more strict. Unfortunately, I think one of the things is that parents have backed away from their children's dating and just involvement in helping them find a mate. And I think that they've done that to the detriment. I think that it's like people feel weird, like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's their own life. It's like, well, okay, but it's not going well for many people. So maybe we should get more involved. The pill, it was considered essential for women's independence. One of the things that is it allowed them to control the number of children that they had, and that allows them to have independence from their husbands. So there was a concern over the proper role for young single women. Doctors had to try to figure out. I mean, today we wouldn't think about this, but like back then, the doctors were like, should I give this to them or should I not give this to them? And like by giving it to the young woman who's, say, unmarried and she's 21, it's, like, is that a license for her to be promiscuous or for her to have sex outside of marriage and commitment? And so there was a concern over that. So, but the sense of control and status was profound because it allows women to, in essence, act more like men do, in that they can have casual sex without having to be as worried about creating a pregnancy. Still the STD concern and other concerns, rape and sexual violence, that is still existing, but I think that the pill changed a lot of the mental processes around this. So let's look at the various methods of birth control that are used between women of like reproductive age 15 to 49. And what we can see here is that the female sterilization is very large, I think 27%, pills 20%, male condoms 13%, IUDs, intrauterine devices. It's more like a device that's put into a woman's body to keep her from being able to conceive and make babies. Male sterilization 8%, withdrawal method 5.5%, and then a few others that are much smaller. Sex in long-term relationships and not On average, married couples report having sex a little less than 1 time a week. Married people have more sex and report more satisfaction. This is a surprise to a lot of people because we think of sex as being something that happens among younger people and among single people. The reality is that married people have more access to sex because they're usually sleeping right next to somebody that they are encouraged to have sex with by society, and they've got time to experiment with that person, to become comfortable with that person, and that matters a lot when it comes to satisfaction. Um, the pressure to have better sex has increased. I mentioned Cosmopolitan magazine is encouraging people to have better sex. They're not the only ones. Movies and books and even the religious community is encouraging people to have better sex. So sex within marriage became more adventurous and more honest because of that. Again, there's just more of an emphasis in that society is saying to people, hey, you should be enjoying sex. Women, you should be having orgasms. And you should be talking about sex, that not at least between each other. Again, I think that in the past, sex, even among people who were 50 years old, who were married, been married for 30 years, they would have not talked about sex that much between the couple. And if they did talk about it, it would have been like whispers and between girlfriends, and men probably have always bragged about sex and things like that. But in terms of being honest, that was not something that happened before. I don't think it happens that much now, honestly. I've had very few conversations with people that were honest. Again, most sex is about joking or it's about bragging. It's very little. There's very little like honest conversations about sex. I think it's just awkward for people. Infidelity. Infidelity is where people are cheating. They among the married community, 19% of men and 14% of women were reported infidelity, meaning they're committing infidelity. That's pretty high if you think about this. This is 1 out of every 5 married men and 1 out of every 7, I think 7 or 8 women. Right. The numbers are higher for older men. I think this is higher because they've had more time to have an affair. I also think it was more tolerated in the past. Men have historically had more power than women, and so when men have more power, there's less of a fear that the wife is going to leave if she's not working, for instance. So, it is more frequent when they're separated by periods of time. He goes off to Nevada to do a job for 3 or 4 months. It is more likely to happen during that time. Non-traditional couples may feel more inclined to casual non-monogamy. So couples that are, I don't know, not married and more liberal-minded and more urban, they may be able to say, hey, you know what, marriage and monogamy is old-fashioned, and so my partner can sleep with someone else as long as they're not hiding it and it's, other things. Sex at older ages. Many people remain sexually active into their 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of research on this. Teen sex. So what's going on with teen sex? People assume that teen sex is always bad and getting worse. Why do we always assume it's bad? Well, we assume that teenagers are not mature enough. They're oftentimes not. That's not necessarily the fault of the teen. It's probably the fault of the society that is not encouraging people to mature at a young age. Most teens are not in committed relationships, and so there's a lot to be said for discouraging teen sex. However, realize that historically people have been getting married as teenagers, and so they're obviously going to have sex, and so it is not getting worse, though. Certainly not getting worse. There is less sex among high school students, falling below 40% starting in 2017. However, if people are not having genital sex, they may be using oral sex as a way of like substituting oral sex. That was one of the things that they found after when George W. Bush was president. He pushed a sex education program that was encouraging people to wait until they got married to have sex. And what they found was that people did wait about a year longer than they would have, but then they were using oral sex as a kind of a substitute for that. So trends in teen sex still oriented more toward male desires. And I think this is one of the things that's unfortunate, because you have a lot of teenage girls who are having sex to fulfill their boyfriend or hope to be boyfriend's desires. They're not necessarily wanting to have sex, they're doing it to fulfill someone else's desires. I think it's one of the problems with not having a good sex education program is that girls feel like I have to have sex in order to keep a boyfriend. Sexual activity is more common among socially disadvantaged groups, so people who are poor, people who have lower levels of education, and people who are not Asian or white. Sex is more common. I don't know. I have thoughts about that. I wonder if it's like they have less to do. They don't have like, I don't know, adventures or going on trips that are fun, and I don't know, just so maybe their sex is sort of the substitute. I don't know for that, or maybe it's that life is hard when you're poor and discriminated against, and so your brain starts thinking like more short term, like let's get pleasure now while we have it. About 1/3 of all high school students have received sexually explicit text messages. 1 in 10 have sent them. Problem with explicit text, like if taking a picture of yourself naked, is that once you send it, it's no taking it back. So just really some ugly things have happened because people felt pressured, or they just wanted to take a picture of themselves being sexual and then realize, oh my gosh, this was spread out to everybody I know. Digital communication and easy availability of pornography may lead to a hypersexualized environment. Never before have teenagers had so much easy access to pornography. I grew up in the 1980s. Pornography was something that you could get if you knew somebody, and there were like certain stores that you could go to, and those were usually like populated like with like dirty old men, and it was just hard to like get access to pornography, and a lot of it, by today's standards, it was like barely even pornographic. It was it was like Playboy magazine where people were just half naked, or today it's like what is most available is hardcore pornography, and much like, I don't know, triple X, whereas maybe like in the 80s it was like single X. And so this may be leading to a hyper sexualized environment where people, and this is true, where like boys are expecting sex to look like pornography. At what cost? We have a problem when it's non-consensual. Sometimes pornography is non-consensual, and so it's like it's like monkey see, monkey do kind of thing. Especially if you're not talking about sex, if parents aren't talking about sex, if the schools aren't talking about sex. Most people talk about sex as teenagers with other teenagers, so it's like one bad source sharing information with another bad source, right? And so, non-consensual sex is unfortunately very common. So there was a study done of Dutch teenagers. Dutch teenagers live in the Netherlands, which is like northeast of Germany. Dutch parents communicate more openly with their children, which allows them to monitor their children's behavior and provide positive support. As a result, Dutch teenagers tend to have healthier sexual relationships, less non-consensual sex, less regretful sex. They had sex and they regret it, right? Less STDs and unplanned pregnancies, and less serious emotional consequences. So, poor emotional development of most teenagers can come from a lack of communication skills and how to care for oneself, right? So, and so unfortunately, this probably impacts people who are like in the earlier slide, they are at a disadvantage. They have more poverty. They're going to have more like more like less parental supervision, less support from parents and teachers, less educational opportunities. So, all right, some good news here. Pregnancies are down. If you look at the trend here, this is teenagers 15 to 17 starting in the 1980s, and it has gone down pretty dramatically. Those under 15, gosh, gone down like almost to nothing, and then those 18 or 19 again. So the trend for all these teenage groups is really down over the last 30 years. Sexuality and health. Looking at sexually transmitted diseases, 2/3 of new cases of sexually transmitted diseases are related to male sexual contact. HPV is most common STD. It impacts more than 40% of US adults. There is a vaccine for that, but it has to be administered, shot up, before first intercourse. And because parents are reluctant to think about their children as sexual beings, they are reluctant to give them that that vaccine. So the debate over sex education is a clash of different worldviews. Like, what is the meaning of sex? Like, what is the purpose of sex? Where is it appropriate? Where is it not appropriate? What about marriage? Is marriage sacred, or marriage just a legal document? What about gay people and transgender? And so I think you could actually take the middle of the road with this, and you could say, like, I think it'd be great for schools to teach sex education, because not every parent's going to do it, but there are a lot of parents who say, I don't want my kid being taught. And then the follow-up question is, okay, tell me about how often you have talked to your kids about sex, right? Because we're not living in the 1800s anymore, where it's like we're not exposed to it. We're living in an age where sex is everywhere. It's on TV, it's on TikTok, it's on the billboards. Everyone's friends are talking about it. So you have to combat that bad information, that fantasy, just selling people stuff, manipulative, with a lot of really good information. And if you're not willing to do that, then at least let the school give some effort, because anything's better than MTV, anything's better than TikTok and pornography, where a lot of people learn a lot about sex due to pornography. And again, a terrible place to learn about sex. We have a patchwork of state and local policies, like our healthcare system. Comprehensive sex education about specific practices and skills. It tends to be more effective than abstinence-only education or virginity pledges. Those work for some people. Usually if they have strong support and strong religious convictions, then virginity pledges will work, but outside of those, they tend not to be that effective. Pornography. I have a lot of interruptions this time. Today's young adults are exposed to more pornography, a 90% increase in the last 25 years. Why is there more? Well, it's easier access. Again, it used to be difficult. Today, it's 2 clicks away. And I don't think that a lot of parents don't take even the minimal effort to block it. Like, you can put parental, safeguards on computer systems. I don't know if parents do that. They're not the end-all be-all. There's easy ways around them, but even just something would be better than nothing. But because pornography has increased in use, it is less stigmatized. People talk about their pornography use in the past, which makes it more acceptable, cheaper. Gosh, it's basically free at the point of use. A lot of concerns around pornography, a lot of violence. There's degradation of women. Women are not treasured and loved and cared for in pornography. It tends to be much more animalistic, just about male desire and fulfillment. Just rarely a condom scene in pornography. And the question is, how does this impact us? How does this impact our brains? How does it impact the way we think about sex? Does it encourage violence and undermine relationships? I sometimes wonder, in sort of the basic if people desire sex, what does it take to get sexual fulfillment? Well, traditionally, you think about it like, okay, well, you had to be able to talk to somebody, right? And you had to be able to show that you had something going on in order for someone to sleep with you. You had to you know, have an interaction. But if people can use pornography rather than relationships, it's like, well, what does pornography require? Like 3 clicks, right? It requires no maturity, no job or combing your hair or anything that would foster a relationship, right? And so one of the thoughts is that it's undermining relationships because it's so easy to access it. So what else we have? Young men say pornography was part of their sex education, right? Again, not a great place to learn about sex. Studies show users are more likely to view sex as disconnected from commitment and emotional intimacy, right? Of course, because what kind of commitment do you have to give? What kind of emotional intimacy do you have to give in order to access pornography? Nothing. Pornography may contribute to conflicts within marriage. Just because somebody becomes married and has a committed relationship doesn't necessarily mean that their pornography use ends. It may lead to excessive or addictive behaviors that cause many problems. Pornography, like cigarettes and gambling and shopping, releases dopamine in the brain. Therefore, it is possible to get addicted. So that is it. Not 35 minutes, but I was sort of close. Thank you for watching till the end.